Welcome to the basic shapes video in computer art. The first thing that we need to do is connect to the server. You're going to be going to the STU01 server. Make sure that you sign in. Don't sign in as a guest or P1. Then you want to go to the STU share folder. You're going to go to BHS, then to Art, then to Blevins, Computer Art, and then what you want to do is you want to download that entire painting files folder. And just drag that to your desktop. Now, inside of this folder, you're going to see a couple of worksheets and a set of brushes. What you want to do next is you want to open up Adobe Photoshop CS5. Now that you have Photoshop open, you want to open up the two files inside of the painting files folder underneath painting worksheets. It's called Basic Shapes and the Color Mixing Practice. We're going to deal with the basic shapes first, so you can sort of hide the color mixing practice worksheet in the back. It'll be 2 tabs. And now we're going to talk a little bit about basic shapes and how you can paint them using Photoshop. So the first thing that we need to do is open up the brush set that I sent you. So open up the brush palette, then open up the small box on the bottom, and then load a new brush. Pick the computer practice brushes or painting brushes file, and it should append the list. The first few are the ones that were already in there, so you may need to delete some. So you should have a 40, a 50, a 35, a 175, and a 200. Then click Done. To get that again, you just click the middle button in the bottom of the brushes palette and then just load the brushes. So we don't have a Wacom tablet here at Blaine for every student, so what I try to do is inside of the brush palette, I try to give you some alternatives to the Wacom tablet. The top 3, the ones that I'm kind of going through now, you need to use with the Wacom tablet. The bottom 2 are sort of supplemental to that. So let's talk a little bit about light logic. First of all, we have a value scale from dark to light, white to black. You'll notice here that we have a series of numbers. What the numbers mean is how dark each one of these areas is going to be on an object. So if your light is coming from the right-hand side, like it is in this picture, your highlight or your lightest white, number 1, is going to be on that side, and it's going to gradually go away from that light. The only exception is number 7. That is the reflected light that is cast from this object actually sitting on a flat surface. What I normally do is I start with 9 and I work backwards, so the darkest dark to the lightest light. So the cast shadow at number 9 would be the blackest hue that you have. At number 8, it would be the core of the shadow, or kind of the next darkest section. Number 7 is going to be a lighter color than number 8 because it is actually something called reflected light. Number 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2 are going to be halftones somewhere in the middle. That again is going to be core of the shadow, and then number 1 is going to be your highlight. What I normally talk about are 2 rules in drawing. The first rule is darker things go back in space and lighter things come out. That means that anything that you want to be pushed back or seem as if it's behind something is going to be darker, and anything that you want to come out at you is going to be lighter. The second one is dark at the edges, light the middle. This means that your object is going to have a shape that can be pushed backwards if you bring the lightness out. So now I'm going to go into my Photoshop and I'm going to make a new layer. Why am I making a new layer? So I'm not going on top of or drawing on top of my basic shapes worksheet. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with the darkest color in the value scale, which is black. And I like to dial my transparency down to somewhere in the 80% range. And then I can sort of change this a little bit by going over the top of it until I find out what value, or I figure out the value that I want. So you notice here, what I'm doing is I am filling in all of the cast shadows, which would be the darkest dark on my page. And I can pick up that color by going down to the value scale and using the keyboard shortcut to pick that up while I'm in the brush mode. And then I'm going to come back and I'm actually going to erase the sections that I don't like. So you'll notice that I'm changing the brush here and I'm erasing areas where I don't want this cast shadow to be. That's the great thing about having layers inside Photoshop, is that you can come back and you can do a little bit of editing of some of your shapes, and they'll look very professional, but they won't be really messy. So you notice now that I'm using the, if you hold the Shift key, it will erase in a straight line, either vertical or horizontal. And that's what I'm doing for the for this cube here, for its cast shadow. Now remember, I am on a layer that's above the top of this worksheet because I don't want to be drawing on the worksheet itself until I like what I've done. So now I'm going to start kind of fixing, here I'm sort of fixing a spot that I thought I erased a little bit too much of. And then I'll just fix that again with the holding the Shift key to get a nice square line. And I'll do the same thing with my cylinder. Now, the shapes that were already here were created in Illustrator, which is an easy way to do basic shapes and bring them in. But I'm just doing this for you for practice sake. So now, I think what I want to do is I want to make another layer because I want to start kind of putting on the second color, which is the next value down. So I'm going to make a new layer, layer 2, and then I'm going to start shading my sphere. And what I do here, and this is generally what I like to do with any shape, is I like to shade in the direction of the shape. So you see that C that I'm sort of making, the letter C backwards. It's sort of shading with the shape. And it just gives it a little bit of extra contour. And you would do that in drawing as well. And then I'm going to come back and I'm just going to erase the areas that I don't like. Remember that that black cast shadow is on a different layer, so I'm not going to be erasing anything really. And I am using the keyboard shortcuts, so I'm picking up those colors with my Option key while I'm in the brush mode. So staying with the sphere here, I am going to now change my brush. And how am I doing that? Remember that we're using the bracket keys, so the left bracket is larger, the right bracket is smaller. So now I'm coming in with the third color, and I'm actually staying on the same layer that I had. And you can do that if you want. One of the ways that you may have to do a little bit of extra color mixing because you don't have a Wacom tablet, which is the fancy tablets that the Control Paint videos talked about. You may have to use a mixer brush in order to get the same sort of look. And that's fine. That's just a different way of working. It's just because we don't have those Wacom tablets. So I'm going to go back to layer 1 now, and I'm going to sort of fix my cast shadow because this is looking kind of bad. And I want to get rid of some of this extra sort of fuzziness behind, because I do really want a clean shape. And once I like this particular image, then I will flatten the layer together so that we can kind of put it on top of this worksheet, which is what you'll be doing later. So for the next section, what I would do is then I would start just pulling out the top 2 colors and just sort of going back and retouching areas that don't look right. You want this to look as 3D as possible, so you need to make sure that that cast shadow is on, the core of the shadow is in, you have the reflected light, and then of course you have your highlight. And so now I'm sort of coming back here, and I'm putting some of that together. Now you notice right now that a couple of my areas are sort of banded. That is one of the things that you don't want to have. You want this to be a really smooth transition. And if it's not a smooth transition, then you need to use your color mixer brush in order to make that a smooth transition, because no matter what, it's going to flatten out your shape if your project looks banded. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm just going back on top of this, and I'll be sort of mixing some of these colors together over the top. Remember that I'm on a transparency of about 80%, and that way it can be a little bit softer as well. And you'll start to see that it really starts to look 3D. Now, once you're satisfied with some of the things, you want to make sure that you erase anything that's outside the lines, of course. And then what you're going to do is you can either do one of two things. You can either merge the visible layers, which means that you're only going to merge layers that are seen. So what you could do is you could get rid of the background by clicking the eye in the layers palette and getting rid of the background, and that's called merge visible. Or you can just flatten the image altogether, which is what I'm going to do here, and then you would move on to the next shape. Once you've flattened the layer of the sphere, which you should do every time that you finish a shape so you don't mess any of the other ones up, make sure that you make a new layer and start on the cone, then the cube, and then the cylinder.